early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Joining us virtually is Joel Wamba, who is the Executive Director at SDG2, as we look at sustainable practices that will ensure that there is zero hunger across the globe. Let's check with Joel Wamba if we can have a clear conversation right now. Hello, Joel.
Hello, Blessing.
Over the years, a very poor narrative about Africa has been that of hunger. When Africa is talked about in foreign publications, the picture that Africa is represented with sometimes are children who are malnourished or children who look hungry, and that's been a sad thing. But looking to change the narrative, which has also changed, is not what it used to be now, but complying with the second SDG by 2030. Let's look at where the problem began: insufficient food in Africa.
Okay, thanks for bringing that up. So insufficient food, like you rightly said, agriculture is as old as man, and as old as civilization. But sometimes we have a population rise, literally, and now you need 100 persons to eat the same. While that population was increasing across the globe, very few countries took the initiative to ensure that they put a lot of management practices to food, just so that the same resource available will be able to provide what the increasing population can enjoy. However, in Africa, while the population was shooting, the populace and the leaders never thought, oh, something is going to happen to us in the next 15 years, 30 years, 100 years. We won't have enough food because the land are not increasing, but the people are increasing. People are going to look for more lands to build houses. So what happens to productivity? I think this lack of improper management system is what gave birth to the hunger, in a nutshell. So the population increase without the land commensurately increasing with the population, and also no research, proper research and deliberate effort made to increase that productivity, made that where we are today as Africa, where there is a serious hunger issue, and it's right at us in the face. And I hope that we'll do. I mean, I know that quite a number of efforts have been taking place, but I think it's important that all hands must be on deck, from policymakers, every stakeholders, to the farmers, to everyone, knowing that without food, there's no survival. Basically, I think this is where this problem began from. Thank you. Blessing.
All right. Sure, glad to have you join us once again. Now, according to statistics, about 790 million people worldwide still suffer the issue of hunger. Now, let's look at the fight against hunger worldwide. Now, you observe that the trend is that when it comes to agriculture, which should be the driving force for ending hunger, is largely left for small-scale farmers or peasant farmers. What do you make of this trend in Africa, and what has been the shortfall when it comes to the fight against hunger in Africa?
Thank you, Femi. Yes, like you rightly stated, this has been the bane of Africa, where we have 70, for instance, in Nigeria, with over 200 million persons, and we have 70% of those people living in rural community, and the major activity they do is farming. However, to improve this farming, nothing is being done, or little. Okay, let me not say nothing, but little or nothing is being done in this regard. Now, there is a characteristics of the rural personnel. If you don't try to change their psychology, they are used to farming the same way their fathers farmed 100 years ago. So when you come to tell you I was born in farming, but that's not what will keep. What kept you when you were 5,000 cannot keep us now that you are 20,000. Obviously, this has been the issue. But in the foreign world, right, in the developed nations, what we have is where 20% of the population feed the 80% of that population, and they even have enough to give to countries when there's war and all of that. And these are quite a number of things that we must look at. There's a major trend in the global world. Climate change is really affecting. In the last quarter, you could hear about extreme weathers across. There are conflicts everywhere. Insecurity is not just within Nigeria and Africa. It's a global thing, right? We have the Israel, Hamas, we have the Ukraine, Russia. These are serious issues. And if we don't look into Africa, we have to move, right? There has to be a trajectory. We need to have a goal. Now, I'm glad for SDG2, but now that deliberate activity to end some of this volatility, because you find that we have a trend. This year there's food, next year there's no food. Then something is just wrong. And until we're able to touch these, which majorly sits for Africa, it sits majorly with the smallholder farmers who live in rural communities. And there are quite a number of things that has to be done to improve on that. I think this is basically one of the real issues we're having. Yes.
All right. Now, not doing agriculture the way it has been done several years ago when the population wasn't as high as it is now, we have different practices that have been introduced and embraced by many who are into agriculture. So now we have the GMOs, the genetically modified products or produce. But how can we ensure that as much as this products are modified, it is also safe? Because one of the targets under Zero Hunger is maintaining genetic diversity of seeds, cultivated plants, and farmed animals. So now we have different varieties or species of plants and even of animals, but we sometimes observe that in the quality of these plants and animals, there is a difference compared to what was ensured, which brings us to nutrition. Ensuring zero hunger as much as good nutrition. How can there be a balance?
Thank you, Blessing. I will give it to the research and development system for Nigeria. I know very well for Nigeria and maybe Kenya. I know that the R&D, before, all our seeds were just coming through the ADPs, but right now we have private companies who literally play in that space. The same for animals, right? There's a lot of improved varieties. Most of the birds and chicks, right, to get them from within. A lot of people have gone into that. Now, as beautiful as this is, I know all of the acquired characteristics of seed that must be checked when developing by breeders. This has been done a lot, but there's still a massive gap. In business, everybody wants to digitize, but there's how we say it. You optimize before you digitize. Now, permit me to say, GMO introduction is like digitalization, right? But now the optimization system, which is a management system, it's still a problem. For instance, I work in the private sector. Azikinoma is a private company, but let's use, for example, like maize. The average yield of maize across Nigeria for the rural farmers, this is by the government, right? Without any intervention, they have to farm themselves. It's about 1.5 metric ton, which is 15 bags, 100 kg bags, right? But with the private sector intervention, which is not where it should be globally, right? But where it is today is about 3 to 3.5 metric tons is the reason why the private system is working. But in states like Nebraska in the US, they have 12 metric ton, which is 120 bags. Now, the best of us, which is a private intervention in Nigeria, is talking about 30 bags. So we still have a gap of about 90 bags. Now, how would that? Yes, the seeds are coming, but before we digitize, we have to optimize. Now, that optimization is where we have a serious problem. For instance, there's how they used to farm. They just spread the legs and put the hole and plant the seed. But no, there is actually a standard gap. Planting spacing. There's a standard population in the field. There's a timing of application of fertilizer and chemicals and all of that. There's also the use of some of these tractors and all of that. Now, these gaps is where we have the problem. Yes, these improvements are coming. GMO is going to come. It's here already. But we have a lot of issues to solve, right? Which is like the optimization. Let's give another example. For instance, I can tell you, Nigeria today, we farm about 70.8 million hectares of for grains, right? That's total field that we farm, 70.8 million. And now, majority of these are all rain-fed. It means that if there is no rain, there's no productivity. Less than 3% is being developed into irrigation. So we don't even have oil production. So when we have the rains and when it's the harvest of the rains, there's a lot of food, there's food surpluses like we had from November, December. But when you hit January, February, March, oh my God, because there's nothing coming in anymore. Now that's a big problem. So the government will have to resort into other things like importation. Now, when you do some of that, which is what is happening right now, it means that some people are going to lose job internally, because once there's no profitability that much, because if you kill the price, then private companies who got engaged in business will not be able to make profit, and so they cannot expand. So there's just a lot of work. Like I said, I think once we're able to optimize, then GMO will be a massive success. So it's all interwoven, and there's a lot of work to be done. Thank you, Blessing.
All right. Earlier, you agree with the fact that agriculture should be the driving force for ending poverty and hunger. Now, let's look at what are the challenges contending with these in Africa. Now, and I will put it this way to you as an expert in this field. What are some of the critical steps that should be taken by the government to make agriculture more attractive?
Okay. So there are quite a lot of practical steps, and like they always say, you want to run a simulation to get this result. Where we are today, countries like Thailand were there sometime in the 80s. I mean, we had them even come into Nigeria to even take things like our oil palm, right? The seedlings, our rice. But today we are nothing compared to where they are today. Now, there are quite a number of issues, right? A lot, and a little on leadership, all right? But I think it affects every stakeholder. First of all, we have the issue of climate change. We have a major problem with insecurity. Like in the north today, because of the whole bandits and terrorism, I can tell you that about 30% of the arable lands cannot be farmed because people cannot go to their farms anymore. For some who can go and who will go, they have to pay a larger chunk, like 50% of your cost of production you have to give the bandits for you to be able to harvest. Now, all of this has a larger influence. It means that these guys are only farming to survive them and their family, their peasantness. This obviously is a major, major, major problem. And if we don't get to fix that, is a problem. I mean, it has to be fixed. The other issue is the land tenure system. There are quite a number of people who are experienced in what they want to do, but because they're coming from a very wide range of family, and that land is family based, and this family keeps giving birth. So the average hectare of land available to the rural farmer is like 0.5 hectares per family of 8. It means that even at best level of production right now, 15 bags, you get 7 bags. How long do you a mouth, 8 mouths, and these are rural people, how long would they eat 8 bags of grains all year round? Now, these obviously are quite a number of things. So maybe when some of these issues, digitization, I mean, improved technology, like I spoke about what do you call it now, the technology system, and then a major factor, which I think right now is a problem for us in Nigeria, is access to finance. Because if these farmers do not have access to finance, they cannot get fertilizer or inputs as at the time they need to have it. Now, if you're supposed to apply this fertilizer in June and you have to apply that in August because that was when somebody aided you with money, the reality is that about 60% of the yield potential of that crop is lost. Now, so there are quite a number of issues. So both finance, right, climate, insecurity, and technical know-how, these are very key things that if there's a round table, and I know that there are quite a number of thinking going on, but I think, for instance, I'll give you an example. The CBN, under the leadership of Cardoso, are trying to concentrate majorly on the monetary policy, right, which has helped. But on the background of that help is that the MPR, which is like the interest rate for loan, which used to be about 23%, I mean, it used to be about 15%. Intervention funds were about 9%. Today, you want to have it's about 24%. So nobody can have that. You have less than 3% of agriculture being financed by commercial banks. How will they get this money? So it means that these guys have, for any farmer who gets this money, they have to get funds from informal, like the loan sharks you have, right? Informal lending system. And their interest rate is about 60%. When you're done farming, you're a slave to that system. All right. So there's just a number of things that we must put in place. The CBN came up and said, okay, you know what, to solve that problem, we want to directly affect the farmers by providing input. They gave over 2 billion worth of fertilizer through the Ministry of Agriculture, which is supposed to drive fiscal policy for agriculture. But this is not the first time. We used to have Operation Feed the Nation, where the government directly impacted the people, but it didn't save us from hunger. But at least I know that there's a little problem with the anchor borrower scheme in terms of repayment. But if we also check the success of that scheme, when we allow the private system operated, because they made profit, people were able to drive in. There was a lot of job. I mean, agriculture began to contribute over 40% to GDP. Now, if you want to change from that, I know that, the previous government didn't do well, mostly with the central government leadership, right? But what you also want to do is analyze this data, check where are the gaps. What happened that some people couldn't pay? Is it collateral? They didn't collateralize very well. How do we then move these farmers from being unbankable, right, to become bankable? Collateralize their system. These guys have land. What if we have the Urban Development Board give every land collateral so that they can submit that? If they have it, then they are willing to pay, because sometimes they want to go and marry more wives. So there's just a lot that we need to fix. Insecurity, I know that they're doing a lot in terms of insecurity, but quite a number of things have to be done. Maybe also, like I was saying, less than 3% being dedicated for irrigation farming, where we can farm all year round, from 70.8 million. Obviously, if we can achieve 50% of that land, let's say 30 to 35 million is being used for irrigation, so we can farm all year round from 30 to 35 million hectares of land. It will do a lot in terms of stabilizing the price, because if these prices are not stabilized, if inputs are not stabilized, then hunger continues. Per capita expenditure per person, per farmer, is still a problem, right? And quite a number of things has to be done. I think, I know the government is doing a lot. For instance, in trying to stabilize the price from what happened in February, March this year, right? They allowed some companies to import grains, stopped other organizations who were buying off from the farmers to reduce, and it has helped to stabilize the price. But in the long run, it has also made that people have lost jobs. For instance, WFP takes a huge volume of grains from Nigeria and supply to other nations, African nations who are prone because of insecurity. But today, they've been stopped, right? Because we don't have enough to feed, right? And why we should have finances to aid this private system to work. I know that some people use the money for something else, but maybe we should have systems and metrics that will solve this problem, but not completely taking it out, not increasing the interest rate where nobody can literally go. I was hearing from someone, some of these microfinance banks are asking for over 70% to have that funds for 7 months. And it's agriculture. When you plant, it's not like Forex, where you put your money in, the next day you get it back. You have to put this money and bury it in the soil and hope that the climate goes well for you until after 7 months, right? Before the market begins to move for you to make your margin. So you need those kind of interventions and systems that works. They are numerous, but I think if we begin to put our heads together and bring a round table, is there somebody who can do a 5,000 hectares? What's the issue of insecurity in that place? What do you know about this? Okay, fine. What are the inputs? Put all of the systems in place, right? And then harvest it. If we're able to hit, even at the current rate of private sector intervention of 30 metric tons per hectare, right? And if they do that, literally that's going to give us about 15,000 metric tons of grains from a 5,000 hectares. I know what that will do in Nigeria. If we have 15,000 metric tons, over 150,000 bags of grains, I know what that will do currently, right? Now, I'm glad for states like Niger State, who have cleared over 10,000 hectares of land, states like Benue State, and other governors are beginning to come into the space. They're beginning to see it. But when it's government, there's prone to be political interference, mostly when we hit transition period. So what you want to do is liaise with the private sector. It has been known from statistics. US didn't get to where they are today. Thailand, Malaysia, right? Singapore, they didn't get to where they are today because it was 100% the government. The government literally provided the standardization, the monitoring system, but they allowed the private system engage, and then the government ensured that we put controls around it. Now, if the government goes in, yes, it will succeed the first year. By the second year, after the harvest, everybody believes that it's a national cake. But if you have the private sector, they know that it's not the governor. That guy can ask them, hey, am I going to go broke? He puts every system to be fine. Then the government puts structure to control pricing. And we used to have what we call the price control board. Maybe bringing all of that on some of those interventions and find the ones that succeeded and the ones that failed. Why did they fail? We will have to go back to some of these drawing boards. We used to have enough until the population spiked. And maybe also the population difference we have in Nigeria today is something that we should look out for. Right, we're having over 50% of our population being youth. Now, youths don't want to go into agriculture because if you know what, how will I be working for 7 months before I start seeing the money? And you're not sure what the price. You cannot determine if you'll be profitable or not because something can just happen to the market. Now, those level of uncertainty, you cannot put 7 months of your life in a year and you cannot be certain on something. So maybe when the government begins to play in this, reduce the cost of input in some ways, and ensure that at harvest you buy back and then have proper storage where we reduce post-harvest losses. Quite a number of things. But yes, I know that at a larger level, obviously there has to be like a consortium where you bring in private sector together and say, okay, fine, what do you want to do? What are the issues we are faced? And maybe give professionals to analyze all of that and come up with a robust scheme that works beyond the anchor borrower. Anchor borrower was a success in some and was a huge failure in others because of the payment system. I'm literally in that system, so I can tell what the failures, but maybe not on this. But maybe when we call in other stakeholders together, and then we can find a system where we create a database of. We don't even have a database of our farmers. If you go to the Bureau of Statistics, you find a database of farmers. You go to CBN, another system, you find different database of farmers. But we don't even know our farming population. We just know that they're about 70%. But based on crop competitive advantage, what are the crops that can grow in Ogun? What are the crops that can be grown in Sokoto? What are the crops that can be grown in Kano? You know, when you have that, and what percentage of farmers do we have, which are needed for, which are cash crops? Oh, what can we do to improve all of this? It will even drive a lot of these forex issues we're having in the country. Agriculture is still the way out. I can tell you that. As far as we're Africans and we're in Africa, we're in Nigeria, this problem we're having, we cannot solve it until we begin to improve agriculture. Until a lot, we come with some level of deliberateness and really allow the private system, the private sector and the government collaborate to solving a lot of these issues. I think that will help a lot. Thank you, Femi.
All right, one of the things you mentioned is food wastage. Now, how can that be reduced? Let's look at the value chain. Some of the food come in as staple and then they remain as staples. There's really no innovation with them to turn them into some other products that can be consumed. So how can that be handled?
Okay. So yes, I can tell you that there is a lot of effort to drive processing of goods into finished goods where the consumer literally buys to use. For instance, in my company, we started trying to have access to Nestle. And what we had to do, we know that there is a standard that Nestle needed. Now, what comes from the farmers is not as clean as what Nestle needed. So what we have is that we have a tender milling system that then takes those grains through a tender milling machine and then is sorted through a sorter. Now that going through that process now makes that we have grain that has the right quality for Nestle. So instead of Nestle leaving Nigeria for that, to import that, we have it in Nigeria and they buy a lot from that, right? Nestle, Nigerian breweries, Olam, right? Flour mills, right? But the volume that we're doing cannot be compared to what they need to achieve in terms of their market base in Nigeria, right? So a lot has to come into this system. But we still have a major problem from the farm gate. Statistics have it about 33% of what is produced is lost due to post-harvest. Sometimes improper storage, sometimes the market growth, right? Quite a number of things. So to avoid or to minimize this post-harvest losses, it begins from the farm, from harvest. Farmers do not know, so there's a know-how, technical know-how that needs to come in. Maybe a little of a tractor, right, where we have to use a combine. I know that the land system also is a major limitation to the use of tractor. But if I have, like the example I gave, somebody having 5,000 hectares contingent land in one place, right, he literally can have 2, 3, 5 combined, and that will reduce the level of the waste volume to a greater measure, and then also work on storages, right? I know that with the whole carcinogens from World Health, WHO, on some chemicals not to use for storage, right? But there are companies like Grainpo, like Piwa, which is here in Ghana, that have things like cocoons, right? Where you don't even have to apply one chemical, and you can store that grains for over 4 years. The first time I did that pilot was in 2013, and we were able to keep that grain for 2 years. It was as though we just took it out from the market. But sometimes you look at it needs a lot of investment in the first year, right? But a lot has to happen. While we improve on storage, right, we must also improve on processing, right, and the processing speed. But unfortunately, I will say this, and it's not good, right? Amazingly, in Nigeria, we're characterized with people who get into business by patronage, I will explain, rather than mastery. In the Western world or developed nation, people master trade before they get into business. But here in Nigeria and in Africa, we just see what is making money now is agriculture. People just look for somebody and they don't even understand how it operates. So they go by patronage. It's like election. Who's got the popular vote? Which gives me money? So the year that it fails, everybody runs out of it. So if we drive processing too hard, everybody will leave production and go to processing. Now, what will happen is that we'll have factories that do not have raw products to buy from. So there has to be a balance between the productivity. Now, when I say productivity, I'm not saying that we should increase from our 70.8 million hectares to 100 million hectares.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.